Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. In this panel discussion, we are going to just walk through some effective teaching strategies to support DE&I in the online classroom. And we're also going to cover kind of in this agenda here, we wanted to share the areas we'll walk through. Context, let's set the stage, right, before we dive into our discussion. We'll talk about inclusivity, professional development, critical thinking, and innovative teaching strategies. And our goal really is to share some insights and personal experiences from our classes that we think can help you engage students to promote active learning, have that deeper understanding of those tough topics, and just leave everyone hopefully feeling inspired today to try out some new strategies in your classroom that support DE&I initiatives. And we'll start off by saying DE&I is diversity, equity, and inclusion. Never want to assume everyone knows that acronym. So in case you were wondering, that's what that acronym is. So I think we'll get started with the next slide. So context, setting the stage a little bit here. We think it's important to just, again, kind of have that shared understanding of where you're coming from at your own university, the community in which you're teaching from, even when you're online, and obviously sometimes having students from different geographies from where your university is located, it can just really be helpful to kind of provide that foundation, provide that context, and set the stage for where you're coming from in terms of an instructor and from your university's presence too. So if you go to the next slide, Hannah, I wanted to share one quick example before I toss it over to Kent to talk to you about the topic. So for example, at the University of Delaware, one of the things that we're really proud of, and one of the things we recently started in the past few years, is the Anti-Racism Initiative, or UDARI, University of Delaware Anti-Racism Initiative. And this has grown to be over more than 400 individuals of faculty, staff, students, and community members who are basically all working together on this common goal of combating systemic racism and reducing racial inequalities on campus and in the broader community. So this is, for example, the kind of initiative that we make our students both on campus and online aware of, so that they understand that this is how we approach DE&I issues and approach anti-racism at the university. The other reason I wanted to share this is for you as instructors at any university, you most likely have some kind of office of either diversity issues or DE&I, where they have a lot of great resources available. So we do have an office like that at University of Delaware, but our anti-racism initiative, for example, they have a lot of great resources that make it easier for you to talk about issues that maybe you're not as comfortable with or well-versed in yet in your classroom. What are some natural ways for you to weave in those conversations? And so when possible, take advantage of these great resources at your institution. They, for example, can give you sometimes discussion points. They can give you activities that are helpful at the beginning of a class, especially when you're in an online space. We all know it's a little more challenging to get to know the students and for the students to get to know each other when you're online sometimes, especially if you're asynchronous. So if there are opportunities for you to get to know each other and keeping that DE&I perspective and mindset in mind from the beginning of your class, you're really setting a good stage for everyone to feel comfortable, to know that that's an important priority at your institution and for you as an instructor. And the last little quick thing I'll add here is a lot of times there will be DE&I focused lecture series that initiatives like ours at UD, and I'm sure lots of universities have these, they will offer those. And a lot of times there are topics that can relate to your course very directly. So perhaps you could assign something as an activity in a class or even as extra credit. But again, it really provides that setting the stage for your students that this is a space that these issues are important, that you value them as an instructor, and you make them aware that as at your university, these are places where they can feel comfortable discussing these topics. So really take advantage of and lean on resources like this at your university. Just poke around on their websites. You'd be surprised to find how many things are there to make your job easier in the classroom, to bring up these issues and discuss them in a way that's really organic to your class. So I'm gonna toss it to Kent next. I know he's gonna talk about this a little bit more too.
Okay, thanks. If we could go to the next slide. That was a great introduction and sort of easing into the topic here, Tara. And I want to say one thing before I get into some more specifics about context. One of the reasons I thought this was an important topic to discuss is, as I'm listening to you, in our context in West Texas, it would be difficult, it would problematic probably to use terms like anti-racism and systemic racism because of sort of the politics of the region. And we're in a different situation in terms of Texas Tech transitioning from a primarily white institution to a more inclusive one. And the Division of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, which, you know, many of us work closely with, is very important in that transition. And also the Teaching, Learning, and Professional Development Center, because that's where I think there's an important sort of synergy, if you will, between the teaching aspect and the broader goals of the university. In other words, what are the specific things I can do in my class? Or what are some of the strategies that I can borrow from others that have been effective in order to promulgate and really underscore these principles and their importance in students' lives, professionally as well as academically. So I've got a few sort of points there of our steps in this transition to being more inclusive, gaining Hispanic serving institution status in 2019. Recently, a Black Cultural Center opened on campus and sort of right in the center of campus and very visible. We have Hispanic and multicultural centers that are going to be opening soon once we get some renovations done to a building. And certainly, as probably institutions, all of the institutions that are represented, not just by the speakers, but by the attendees, also more emphasis on diversity in hiring faculty and staff. But we are operating within a broader context and need to be honest about that. There is some pushback against these kinds of changes from conservative groups, some of them being affiliated with the university and some not, more broadly political. And you're probably aware that in Texas, there are state level policies and legislation against teaching critical race theory. Those are more K through 12 now, but you know, there's some indications they might be focused at the university level soon. And also some recent policies sort of confronting the LGBTQIA plus community and especially transgender youth. And so, you know, when I'm teaching a class that I'll be talking about today on ethnicity, race, gender in media, I try to, you know, take on these issues directly and actually assign some readings that are talking about what's going on in terms of state policy and more broadly, some of the anti-transgender policies happening in other states as well, as you know, a way for students to be aware and also make that connection between what we're learning and talking about in the classroom and what's happening, you know, out in the political and cultural world as well. So context is very important.
So when it comes to things like professional development, I think both Kent and I had some different examples we wanted to share on this. And so I'll start with one that's actually really specific to an online program that I work with. So one of the roles I have in addition to teaching undergrads is I actually also am the program director for an online Master of Arts in Strategic Communication. And it's actually an asynchronous program. So for any of you who are teaching asynchronously, I feel your pain. It's not always as easy to replicate things when you're not, you know, synchronously teaching online. But there are some advantages, obviously, in terms of the flexibility for our students. And it's more inclusive. It helps people who have different work schedules, whether they're undergrad or grad, frankly, to be able to participate and get their degree on a schedule that suits their needs. So there's a lot of upsides to asynchronous. But when it comes to professional development, how do we provide that extra value to our students and keep DE&I in mind? So if you go to the next slide, Hannah, I'm going to just share one example of that. That's something I hope others can consider and do in their programs too. So one of the things that we do in our program is something called Inside the Industry. And this is an online speaker series. We wanted to give our students the opportunity to engage outside a virtual classroom environment where they're just focused on their classes normally and their assignments in a class. We wanted to give them a space online where they could hear from leaders in their respective, in different industries who replicate kind of that guest lecture experience you might have on a classroom environment. But as you can see from the screenshot, we're really intentional on making sure that we get speakers from a variety of professional backgrounds. We try to represent different genders, race, LGBT. And the reason that we're really purposeful with that, and the tip I have here for anyone who's, again, in an online space trying to find extra ways to connect with your students, you often have heard the saying, people can't be what they can't see. We really think that matters in an online space when you're even a little more isolated sometimes as a student. We try to give our students the opportunity to see the speakers in the practitioners that they want to work with one day. It's a chance for them to network, to meet with folks from different backgrounds. The topics that they cover, again, vary widely based on their profession, their background, their own personal experiences. We also purposely bring in speakers who have done work in the DE&I space that they can speak to, again, at a professional development level, where they're getting a chance to show students how all of the things we talk about in a classroom environment from a DE&I perspective, how that translates to the workplace. So it's really important for them to see that while we very much care about this as an institution and as a university, and they might have case studies in class or assignments in class where we talk about these things, we want to make it very real for them and show them what it means in a workplace setting, how this translates. And so the two tips I have are, one, if you haven't considered something like a speaker series, it doesn't have to be quite that formal, obviously. Even just having a guest speaker once a semester or so can really help, but be intentional when you're creating those opportunities for your students online to hear from different speakers, because the upside of us being online is we can get speakers from anywhere. So even though we're at the University of Delaware, we've had people from across the country, around the world, who can log in and talk with our students. And we're making sure that the people they're hearing from really reflect, again, the diversity of the country and the diversity of the workplaces where they are going to be. So this is, again, just one little snapshot. We've had this going since 2020. We did it before everything was online. I want to say we started in fall of 2019. So we started the speaker series before everybody was online, before Zoom was a big thing. And it was kind of nice. We already had it set up before 2020 happened. But since then, it's just become this great opportunity for our students to engage with practitioners and get to talk about DE&I topics too, again, with people who are already in the workplace. It helps really connect the dots from classroom to boardroom. So that's my little example I was going to share. And I think that Kent has another slide after this.
So that's great, Tara. More really good information and advice. Teaching asynchronous courses can be challenging in terms of doing those kinds of online sessions and interviews. So the approach I've taken is more to record interviews with people, because like I've got a class now of 112 students, and it would be really hard to get everybody together at 3:30 on a Tuesday or whatever. So having it making it available for students to be able to go retrieve when it works in their schedules is important. And so some of the things I've done, we actually have some alumni from our college who work at the North Texas Commission, and that's a sort of business and trade group that's very focused on diversity issues. So they have this Leading Different series, and it's basically underscoring the importance of not only having inclusive workspaces in organizational settings now, but reaching out and encouraging students to be thinking about that, and reaching out to us as faculty to help students prepare for working in those kinds of spaces. So, doing interviews with them and making them available. I try to reach out to Hispanic, Latino, and multicultural agency personnel, particularly for the people who are going to be going into advertising and public relations, just to get a sense for what that is and what some of the expectations and needed skills are, and also incorporating local media professionals. We're not on the Acela line like you all are, I think, in the University of Delaware. We're kind of surrounded by cotton fields and in the South Plains of West Texas, but it's important that there are some local media professionals, and for them to be able to also share some of their experiences and expectations in terms of people coming into the workforce. And actually, for the last assignment that I have the students do in this online course, it's writing a diversity, equity, and inclusion statement, a statement of their viewpoint. And they may or may not have to do that, in job applications in the near future, but just thinking through some of those issues, it's also a way for them to reflect back on some of the principles and ideas from the course and how to incorporate those in a more professional setting. Unfortunately, at the beginning of February, our governor came out and said that these are illegal to be used in state agencies, and is trying to get them not used in universities as well. So I'm interested to see if there might be some pushback from some students, like, why are we required to do this assignment when the governor says that we shouldn't be using these things? But I think I can, defend it in academic terms, like making that nexus, that connection between what students are learning in a course like the one I'm teaching, and their preparation for a long and successful career in what's likely to be a much more diverse workplace than their parents or certainly grandparents worked in. So I'll hand it over to Tatiana now.
Thank you, Ken. I wanted to go back to diversity and democracy. So I teach a course in diversity and communication at Point Park University in downtown Pittsburgh. This is an online course, a 15-week online course. And the context is very, very important there. Before we even get into discussions of media and diversity, and a sample syllabus is available through the website of this presentation. A short description of the course and course objectives, it's available for download. So why context is so important? Because America is the only nation in the world that offers a project that is not bound by territory or blood. And this is freedom achieved through democracy. So freedom and social justice are two universal ideas that appeal to everybody on earth. And I introduce a special unit in this 15-week course where we talk about it. It is a very important part of the course because students can really ask this question, why diversity? And the answer is American Democratic Project is what unites all Americans. And this is actually one of the discussions that we hold in this online class. What unites Americans? That's a discussion prompt. And students always say freedom, but it is democracy, how freedom is realized. The current fragmentation and polarization of society showed that democratic projects stalled, and diversity allows to acknowledge mistakes from the past and chart the course to the future and restore hope. In October 2021, in the National Strategy on Gender Equity and Equality, the Biden-Harris administration issued a statement, and it was emphasized there. America is unique among the nations of the world because we were built on an idea that every one of us is equal in dignity and deserves to be treated equally. Though we have never fully lived up to that idea, not at the time of our founding, nor in the centuries since, it is the defining hallmark of our country that we have never stopped reaching for it. From the Emancipation Proclamation to the passage of the 19th Amendment to the Voting Rights Act and Civil Rights Act, to the fight for reproductive rights and marriage equality, and countless movements and victories before and since, America has been strengthened through the years by our tireless pursuit of greater equity for all. So for me, these are the guiding lines. They set the tone for the class, and that's why context, and very broad context, is so important. So that's what I wanted to go back to on. And since now we are on the next slide, I wanted to ask the participants. So now we are on the inclusivity. That's the next item we wanted to address in this presentation. So inclusivity. When we build courses, when you build courses, what strategies, what approaches inform you? If you could quickly in the chat, let me know what frameworks you use and what approaches you use when you build courses dealing with diversity, equity, and inclusion. If you could just quickly type in the chat to get a sense of where we are all. Images, very good, very good. choices of modality of submission. Excellent. Course policies. Very good. Diverse course materials, diverse authors, community standards, core written by the class. That's excellent. Yes, that's very good. Mixture of assignments. Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you. If we could go back one slide, would that be possible to go back one slide? So the Peralta Online Equity Framework. This is the guiding framework for me in approaching the assignments and selecting course materials, like you say, and the mixing assignments and providing different examples and viewpoints. So because this is an online course, this was one of the frameworks I looked into. And the Peralta Online Equity Framework, also known as rubric, was developed as part of the Online Equity Initiative. And it is based on research. It is an evaluation instrument, and it focuses on several categories, broad categories: technology, student resources and support services, UDL principles that we probably very well familiar, and more information about it could be actually found under on this site. I will just paste it into the chat. I will paste it into the chat so you can also access it. There we go. This is the equity rubric, and this is actually, I would call it framework rather than rubric. And the rubric itself, right here, it is available. Also, I pasted in the chat. Okay, just a moment. There we go. This is the PDF of the rubric, and it is CC BY, share alike. And the latest version was version 3, published in October 2020. CC by attribution and share alike. So what does this framework and consequently a rubric, the next slide, please, if we could, help us to do. So the equity rubric itself, emergent from this broader framework, focuses on areas including DEI, including diversity, equity, and inclusion. So if technology aspects from the point of view of equity and inclusion, among those you can see inclusive course community, alternative pathways available to complete course activities. Under support services and student support and resources, you may see course structure and activities that mitigate technology access issues. Support services that help with student success, student wellness. Universal design for learning. Then comes the DEI aspect. And there's more than one attribute there. And I believe they could be combined. So if we do combine them, all 4 remaining categories, if you follow the PDF, they could be collapsed into one. I think they all belong to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And these are the images, as someone already mentioned, and representations. It is also addressing human bias, and it is content, meaning, and fostering connections and belonging. So this rubric is very, very helpful in many situations and from many points of view. And it is also available on the website for our presentation, so you can download it. Or if you already accessed it, that's great. So thank you. Back to you, Tara.
Thanks, Tatiana. And I think we're actually going to go to slide 12. Great. Yes. Thank you, Hannah, for critical thinking. And I think that Kent actually might be up next. Is this your slide coming up? Yes.
Okay. If you would advance one more, please. I think everybody in this session will agree that critical thinking is really important for our students, and not just in one or two courses, but across the curriculum. It's kind of like the topic we're talking about, diversity, equity, and inclusion, shouldn't be just one course that students take and then they kind of forget about it. Just like in media and communication studies, ethics shouldn't be just relegated to one course, but every course should have some element of ethics related to it. And I think it's important to tie that to the different subjects that they're studying, or different aspects of a field that they're learning about, but also to reinforce the message that these are underlying principles that are really important. So in the asynchronous online course that I teach, ethnicity, race, gender, and in media, we deal with critical thinking and media literacy in module 2, which is right after the course introduction and US demographics, including Texas demographics. Hopefully you all are aware that Hispanic Latino population is the largest social group in Texas now, having surpassed whites last year at some point. And so that's, a really important reason behind the transition of the university more broadly that I was talking about, and, trying to keep up with it in the curriculum. Students don't necessarily read reports from the state demographer or, that section of the newspaper websites or whatever. So it's important to, reinforce what's happening demographically in the country and in certain regions of the country. I think it also, reinforces the importance of the course. If they're feeling like, oh, this is some required class that I have to take or whatever, out of the gate, show them that this is more broadly important to them, professionally and in their personal lives as well. So, basically what I do is try through the modules that follow after critical thinking and media literacy to reinforce that, and through assignments also, how might you apply critical thinking to this issue? And that way it's not just one module, to my prior point, within the course that we get done as some of the background and introductory material, but you're constantly trying to keep those threads connected throughout the course. And, as far along as that last assignment that I was talking about, a viewpoint on diversity, equity, and inclusion, that should also have some, critical thinking behind it. Thank you.
So thanks for sharing that, Kenton. It makes a great point that I'll just kind of continue to underscore here, that when it comes to critical thinking, you really want to be intentional about creating those opportunities for your students to get a different perspective on topics that might not necessarily seem DEI specific at surface level, but give them a chance to really, again, have that deeper thinking and not just having that one moment in the class where they're talking about diversity. So again, making it more relatable for our students. Sometimes diving into a new concept or a theory can be really overwhelming. And so it helps to find a topic students can connect with. This is a example of an activity in my undergraduate public relations course where we explore how students can relate their personal experience to a public relations theory. I mean, most students' eyes glaze over when they hear about theories. I'm always trying to find an exciting way to make it relatable for them. Take those moments to make it relatable to them and all their different backgrounds and perspectives that they bring to the table. Everyone brings a different perspective. So again, to create meaningful learning opportunities, make sure that you're selecting a timely and relevant social issue or public affairs topic that students can feel comfortable reflecting on. Now, it could be things that are really tough to discuss, like climate change, gun laws, abortion, taxes, immigration. But when you choose that topic, if you're giving your students to write individually, have a moment to reflect on a response, and get a chance to have some of that individual deep thinking before you continue with a discussion, you're giving your students a chance to have a space where there's opportunity for civil discourse, right? Like, it's important for us to address these issues, but getting them to think before they speak, I find, is incredibly beneficial, and rather than just opening up the room to just discussion at the outset. So again, by supporting DE&I in the classroom, we want to foster an environment where these topics can be discussed without fear of judgment or backlash, and the critical thinking that happens before the discussion is really important. So just wanted to share that this is an example of how you can create a space for these topics by adding, again, that layer of reflection and discussion afterwards. So they're thinking before they speak, kind of grounds everybody. Then I think we have the next slide.
Did Tatiana want to add anything on critical thinking?
Sure. Well, critical thinking is very, very important in a class that deals with diversity, like any other classes. But to me, the success of a diversity class is to induce students to assess their beliefs critically in the first place. So what does this mean? This means to encourage them to treat their beliefs as hypotheses. Psychologist Peter Wilkinson demonstrated that our beliefs are susceptible to confirmation bias and can be easily influenced or shattered by reality. So this is the concern that students believe that they come in with into a class could be easily shattered by encountering facts of life. And they come in very open, very enthusiastic about diversity. And in my class, I have millennials and mostly post-millennials. And they are the most diverse generation ever. And they're most open-minded and tolerant. But according to Wilkinson from 1960s, confirmation bias occurs when people seek out or evaluate information in a way that fits the existing thinking. So Wilkinson believed that scientific knowledge and scientific thinking includes not only confirming, but also disconfirming one's hypotheses. So in this class, that's the approach, to make sure that it is students who do that, and not a professor, but students themselves start doing it, start arriving at answers and start asking questions, and that they are as close to the state of science as possible by providing them with materials, a broad range of perspectives, different perspectives, and providing them with room for scientific reasoning through induction, deduction, abduction, analogy, and so on. And Peter Wilkinson believed that at the core of scientific thinking is testing hypotheses. And I agree with him. And he pursued this subject and came up with this idea, with this concept, confirmation bias. And that was his famous 2-4-6 experiment. So to avoid confirmation bias, Wilkinson believed we should not only confirm hypotheses, but disconfirm them. And he argued that this is the most economical way of testing hypotheses. So how to do that in an online class? Through discussion and through self-reflections, different self-reflection prompts. So this is the approach.
If I could just follow up very, very quickly with that before we move on to teaching strategies. I think you brought up a really important point, Tatiana, and that is, how are students oriented when they're coming to campus? And I agree, the generations that we're seeing now are much more tolerant and broad thinking, certainly, than, when I was that age as a late boomer. But there's also the phenomenon that I think that some students come hearing, oh, you're going to the big bad university, be careful, you might get canceled, be careful, there's wokeism, and that can be inhibiting for some students. Also, to clarify, some of you may be wondering with some of the critical comments I've made, well, why is this guy, still working in Texas? I really like working in an environment where there is diversity among the students, not only in terms of ethnicity, race, gender, sexual orientation, but also in terms of their, political views and, their viewpoints on culture and society more generally, rather than having a very, left-leaning or very right-leaning student base. We have quite a bit of diversity, and it can be challenging at times, but it's also nice to draw from, because you can have discussions where, rather than sort of assuming or projecting what another opinion might be, it's actually represented there in class. And the challenge is trying to get the right conditions within the classroom or online for students to feel comfortable sharing that with each other, because then they can learn directly. And the peer-to-peer learning, I think, is a lot more effective than the professor to student learning in many contexts.
Absolutely. And thanks for sharing that, Ken. I'm sure folks were wondering, and you've answered that question, I thought, very well. And people seem to appreciate in the comments that you are there working and doing what you're doing in a diverse group of, a different community, different perspectives. Not everyone necessarily is going to work in an environment where everyone's on the same page, and that's real life. So I think there's a lot of value to what you just said. I want to be mindful. I just noticed we have about 6 minutes left. So we'll try and go through the last couple of slides here, but if folks want to put questions in the chat window, we can also start responding to some of those now, so that we have time for that. So Hannah, next slide, please. So I'll just quickly mention this here. These were just some quick hit tips I thought would be helpful when I've had discussions with faculty in my university around how do you make sure that you're not just having the token diversity week or diversity module in your syllabus. This is what I find to be some quick, easy ways to make sure that DE&I is integrated into your curriculum for the semester. Making sure that your assignment prompts include DE&I challenges. And I have a couple examples of that on the next slide, but you don't necessarily have to make it a standalone thing. Anytime you have an assignment, there's probably an opportunity for you to include something that reflects on these DE&I topics. I mentioned earlier about our speaker series. So this is kind of a similar tip here, is make sure your guest speakers, if you're having a recorded session like Kent was sharing earlier, or you're doing something live like we do with my speaker series, make sure that they're reflecting diverse viewpoints. Really be intentional about who's on the screen that your students are interacting with. And then when it comes to things like articles, videos, websites, anything you're assigning for your students to review, make sure that those are coming from diverse viewpoints too, from both sides of political discourse, from both sides of different multiple ethnicities and gender and sexual orientation. So think about every time you're looking through your syllabus and everything you have assigned, is it all coming from one viewpoint? Underrepresented historical figures and scholars in your field. This is a great one because every field has people who have contributed but don't necessarily get the limelight, right? In that mainstream textbook that everyone's used since the beginning of time. Use that as an opportunity to create an assignment. We actually do an assignment like that in my class where a really great scholar in our field created this activity, and she shared it with all of us, where they have to look up a list of people who are underrepresented in the field of public relations, and they have to do research and share it with the class so that those folks are being recognized now. That's a great way, again, to recognize different backgrounds in a classroom environment. And then we talked earlier, so I'll skip this now, but again, creating a safe space in class for uncomfortable conversations, having those critical thinking, reflection moments helps to ensure that people aren't coming into the conversation without having thought through what they're going to say. So Hannah, if you can just flip to the next slide quickly, I'm not gonna take too long with these, but this is a quick slide of an example of an activity we did in one of my classes where we used a current event that was happening. Actually, we use this after the fact, but you can use current events that are happening. When many of you probably remember that Pepsi ad with Kendall Jenner that just went terrible because it was really exploiting the Black Lives Matter movement. It created a lot of controversy and a lot of news coverage and buzz. My students were talking about this for weeks. We were able to take that and connect it to a learning goal in class. So take DE&I topics you're seeing in the news and find ones that overlap organically with a topic or a concept or a learning goal. Your students will be much more engaged rather than you having a token diversity week. You're showing them that DE&I exists in real life every day. And then the next slide is my last one to share in, I think it's the Starbucks. Yes. So again, this is just another example ripped from the headlines, as they say, when Starbucks in Philadelphia was, caught for having 2 Black men arrested from their store. This created, again, a big national backlash in the media, and Starbucks went through a ton of, again, media coverage around this issue. take those moments to find where can we discuss this topic in our class in a natural way, because it's real life. It's bringing these issues outside of the textbook, outside of the classroom, and showing your students why this stuff matters beyond just, again, the token diversity week in school. So I'm going to leave the rest of the time here we have left for Kenton and Tatiana to add in, and we'll respond to questions in the chat.
I'll pass in the interest of time.
Tatiana, do you have anything you want to add? I know we had some sound issues before.
Yeah, 1 or 2 slides back, if we could, please. There we go. So different approaches, and someone asked in the chat already, how do you establish that atmosphere? So the atmosphere of trust, so students could feel safe to express their views and opinions. So the answers here is that the selection of instructional methods is strategic, really very important. And discussion is one of those methods. And I use a Socratic method. And basically, this is asking questions to stimulate critical thinking and deep thinking. And questions follow questions, and asking questions instead of giving answers, and asking more questions. And these questions are getting modified based on student answers. So basically, it's leaving up to the students to find the answer rather than imposing any answers on them. And providing them with a variety of resources, including articles, reviews, book reviews. Harvard Business Review is a fantastic resource. And New York Times is a wonderful resource. And staying current with the New York Times, we actually do hold such a notion as a lab, diversity and communication lab. And there are New York Times readings every week, some required, some optional, just suggested as additional materials. There are also ways of looking at reports and polls by Pew Research and Gallup and Ipsos and Nielsen and Neiman, and think tanks such as Brookings or McKinsey. So lots of different ways to gather material to provide room for thought and for discussion and for deliberation by the students. Here's a couple discipline-specific learning objectives from the course, and they're also part of the syllabus. I noticed that there were some comments in the chat that the syllabus cannot be loaded. I'll be happy to email those, the rubric, the Peralta rubric, and the syllabus. And my email would be at Point Park University, tdomova@Point Park University. So if you cannot access those, just let me know. I'll be happy to share.
Now they have access. Yeah. Earlier, earlier there was an issue, but now they have access to the
That's fantastic. Thank you, Hannah. Thank you. Back to you, Kent, if you have anything else.
Not at this moment. Thank you.
And one last thing I'll add, I know I put it in the chat window, we didn't have enough time to cover disabilities and inclusivity in terms of that, but I will just quickly throw out, if you're wondering about tips on that, universal design is very helpful for online learning and making sure that your materials are accessible to everyone. And in terms of, again, including people in that conversation, consider that again with your assignments, your guest speakers. I know we didn't give enough time to cover that with our technical issues, but I did want to call that out since I saw a few folks asking. So hopefully that was helpful. I think we answered all the questions in the chat window. But thank you all so much for joining us. We hope that the tips we gave were helpful and that this conversation continues. It's an important one to have. So we appreciate your time today.
Thank you.
Thanks to the folks at Rutgers for hosting this. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for joining us today and for hosting us. Thank you.
Bye.